So welcome to part 2, legends, and yes, I have made a decision. Oh my God, he's made a decision. Everyone who watched part 1.5 and commented, thank you so much. And I do agree, let's go with option 1. Now, ideally, most people said option 3, wait for the right size, and that's probably ideally what I would normally do. This is 80 meters of goodness. It's a small mistake made by me, not a big issue. And I think a couple of comments said, suck it up and get it done, and we will. So we are using the 80 meters of goodness, a little bit thinner, but that does not matter. Now I've got an update for part 3. Some parts and pieces have come from Amazon that I've been waiting for, and an update on how we run in Australia, well, how I used to race. This is the connector that I used at my racetracks in Melbourne, Australia. I love my SCP2. But unfortunately this connector won't work in Europe, and I need some banana connectors, which I now have. So in part 3, we'll wire up my controller, and the controller connectors for this track that are supplied are the banana connectors. So I'm now European ready to rock and roll. And the third part, a massive thank you to Slot Mods, who made a really good point in part 1.5, which is a norm in Australia. When we order braid in Australia from Mr. Slot Car, it has already been pre-adhesive with double-sided adhesive tape. Now I was lucky enough to use some of Mr. Slot Car's braid. I've ran some braid on some of his customers' tracks. It was a lot of fun, and it is already pre-adhesive, which glue is good, but if it seeps through, you might get some dead spots. So we'll be using some double-sided adhesive for laying the braid on the sections that need to be done. Ideally, I would like to use a good quality 3M or Worth. I'm here in Austria. Worth is the big brand, but unfortunately I could not find it in time, and this was at my local hardware shop. So we're using double-sided tape. That's enough of me jibber-jabbering. I'm gonna get behind the camera, discuss what I'm about to do it, move on, and let's get some power on this track. And hopefully this is enjoyable for you to watch at home. So part 2, let's go. Rightio, first up, let's tackle the big boy first. This back corner, I've pre-unscrewed it. We're gonna pick it up and turn it and place it right here so I can work on it a lot easier. And we're gonna replace the braid on the whole of this corner. Yes, brand new braid. And of course, we're gonna wrap it underneath so we've got continuous power. So let's set the camera up and let's hit the big boy first. Alrighty, so remove the piece, it's unscrewed, and as you can see here, none of the joins are overlapping, which we need the braid to come up and under. So we'll be replacing all the braid, which is in good condition. Some comments said yes, solder some new braid on, drill a hole, pull it through, put some new braid in. But I think as a learning, let's just re-braid it all. And if anything does go wrong, I can order the right stuff in the future. So let me de-braid this and then re-braid. Alright, as you see, we've got no braid left, which is good. We are ready. A nice clean surface. So I'm going to quickly check to make sure there's no glue high spots, which are going to then raise up the braid, which we don't want, but it looks pretty good from eye. Now it's time to lay some double-sided tape. Now, unfortunately, the tape I've got is a little bit wide, so if there is any overhang, I will run a razor through to cut it out of the guide. You don't want anything in the guide slot, otherwise it will unsettle the car or potentially stop the car. So now let's run some tape and then some new braid. And while we have the braid off, I thought I'd quickly show you the size difference. Now that's the original braid. As you can see, the width is perfect for the cut itself. And here's our new braid, which is a little bit on the thin side in regards to width, but I don't think it's going to be an issue. So let's push forward. That's our braid, 80 meters of goodness. Run some tape, let's get it done. So as you can see, we have ran some tape on the inside corner. I do have to trim it back. It is a little bit too wide, which I knew when I purchased it. Not a problem. I will run a razor around and making sure that there is nothing that's getting into the guide slot itself. The tape I did choose is very thin, so there's no height. We're not going to lift the braid up too high off the track. So now I'll trim that off. I'll run some test braid on this inner section. I'll show you that. If it works perfectly, well then I'll finish the rest of this corner. And of course, we'll continue on. So tape and braid update. We have now got some braid laid down. I'm very excited. This tape seems to hold really well. Being so thin is a bonus. Now, quick tip as well. I haven't done it properly yet, but when you do finish off your tab, I've got a lot left over. Pull it to the side. I'm going to staple these to the side. So these two don't touch in the future. And of course, now you've got some spare overhang if you want to run some power. So quick tip, pull down and then to the side. So underneath it is pointing away from the other side of the track. But this has gone down really well. The tape appears to be holding well. Yes, it's a little bit thin, but I think we're okay. Now, in regards to the tape, I simply ran a nice razor down the middle as hard up against the inside slot as I could, which has now allowed me to use the other half as this side's tape. So I'm going to finish off this complete corner, then we'll move on to the next part of the track. So this corner is almost finished. I did not want to bore you showing you how to lay it over and over again, but we will do the last bit of tape together. And when I get the braid done, we'll finish that off to complete this corner and then move on to the next. So let's finish off the tape. So now let's finish off this last little bit of braid and then we can move on to the next part of the track. So the corner is complete, all has been braided and taped. As you can see, we've got plenty of overhang for power taps if need be. Tuck it under. We now have a nice join with the next track that we will connect it to. So what's left to do now is to move the corner back into place, screw it down. I will use this as my template to set the rest of the track off it so it's nice and straight. Of course, getting our bridge perfectly aligned. And now I just need to fix some other parts of braid around the track. But this was the biggest job. In regards to the braid itself, it is a bit on the thin side. So when I was laying it, you did have plenty of room to move left and right. So I was trying to be as steady as I could, but very simple to do. Now, of course, I'm not an expert, but I think this is going to get the job done. All right, put it back in place and let's move on. So the big corner is finished. I've got it in place. I will screw the big corner in place. The rest of it I won't. I'm going to have to shuffle around a little bit, but the braid is looking good. It's ran underneath nicely. What's next is cutting this little section here. Now I won't show you the cut on camera. It's simply cutting the braid further this way and I'm going to wrap it under. The reason I'm doing that, we still need to replace this whole section, but for me not to use the new braid all the way along, I'm simply going to cut here, fold these under and create this as its own piece now, because there is a join over here which is already perfectly done by the seller. So instead of doing a whole piece again, we'll be just doing this section on its own. So off camera, I'm going to cut that, wrap it under, and then we'll tackle this bit. And you know what? That is pretty much almost complete. I'll put the track into place and then we can see if it powers up. So I thought I'll show you a quick update on this section. We have removed the braid all the way along. I still need to remove the braid on this side, but I wanted to show you what I meant by cutting the braid at length. So as you can see, there's a little bit of overhang on this side now, which I will tuck under, and that's exactly what it looks like when I'm finished. So now when we run the new braid, it will marry up with the new section perfectly, and it has saved us a lot of braid and a lot of time, because now this part here is perfect. So I've completed chopping and cutting this new bits of braid. It's all taped down. I've actually run out of tape, so we need some more tape. We're moving on to here now, which I thought I had to pull all this up and re-tape some new stuff because the ends have been snipped. But luckily enough, the seller was running this as a power tap. You can see there's bits of braid hanging down. Well, luckily for us, that's on this side. So I'll pull the braid off, make sure it goes all the length because there's plenty to make it go all the way along, and we'll re-stick this braid down using this again. So this saves us a lot of braid, a lot of time, and it's going to marry up with this one perfectly. So all that's left now is deciding what to do here, which we are going to cut right there, making that a two-piece, running some braid underneath like we did on the other side, and finishing off this nice little stretch, and then we're done. And jumping over here, as you can see, I've taken off these bits of braid which run all the way underneath, and they used to join right here. Now what I've done, I have cut the bit of braid about 1 inch to your right. That will now fold under this side. This one will fold under, and we'll now create this as its own single piece. So all that's pretty much left to do is run some braid on this bit, straighten it up, screw it down, make sure everything is in place, fix the joins on this one, and then let's see if it powers up. So final update, the track is together. Yes, we do have power. I've done many laps on it now in between filming the last segment, which as you can see, I'm wearing a different top, to filming now. Now I have had a couple of hiccups along the way and I've learned a lot. Of course, this was all unplanned, and I was trying to do it DIY and what I could use off the shelf. Now, the braid is incredible, nothing wrong with the braid. Really, really happy. The width, yes, it would have been a lot easier if I did have the original size. Does it work just as well? There's no problem with power. It is the same as having the thicker or the thinner braid. It does not matter. What the issue was, the tape that I used, the double-sided adhesive, the thinnest I could find was still too wide for this braid, leaving a sticking spot along the side of the braid. So when the car drove across, it was creating a sticking spot on the braid, or if the car bottomed out, it would almost grab onto the chassis and make the car stop. So almost like a jerky motion. I did try and trim those overhangs, but it just wasn't gonna work. So what I have done in between filming the parts when I was wearing grey to now, I've literally pulled everything back up and I've gone back to gluing just to get the track together. Now that's created its own issue. I'm not a big fan of glue. Now I do have some little high spots here and there which are de-slotting some of the cars, mostly the 132 scale. 124s don't go too bad at all. I've still got to move the track around a bit, but over time it will flatten out. I will glue it over time. I'll find little bits and pieces that I can push back down. And overall, it is usable. I can get some pretty fast laps out of it. So all that said and done, it's time to get a couple of cars around the track. I'll run a couple of one of my favorites, the BRMs. I've got 2 BRMs I'll run, and I'll run a Pioneer Legends because that's a really cool car on this track. So I hope you did enjoy the journey I was on. Yes, it could have been a lot easier. I could have done stuff a lot better. It was very much DIY and overnight decisions. Anyone can do it. I'm not a professional. But now let's have a little bit of fun and let's run some cars. So that's a wrap on part 2. Thanks a lot for coming along the journey on my slot car track adventure here in Austria. We still have a couple of niggles with the track. We're going to flatten that braid out in some high spots because it is de-slotting the 132 scale cars. In part 3, we'll be rewiring my controller because the power system I do have for this, the original power system, does require the banana plugs, which I do need whilst I'm here in Europe anyways if I go racing, and this is my controller that I take. Also, I need to put the computer in and the lap timing system all in one. So that's going to be a big episode. I'll get started on that very, very soon, but episode 2's done and dusted. The track is running. Look forward to some reviews very, very soon on some cars. We ran a couple of cars. I think they went quite well. But as always, at THATSLOTCARGUYOZ on Instagram and YouTube, if this is the kind of content you like, please consider subscribing to the channel. Hit the bell icon because I'm always uploading stuff, whether it's news, reviews, anything in between. But be safe, take care, support your local. Ciao.